Welcome to the Wayne Bennett Podcast, celebrating West Virginia's people, places, and the culture of Southern Appalachia. Now here's your host, Wayne Bennett.
Welcome to Wayne Bennett's Podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Bennett. This is episode 184. It is April the 13th, 2026. And today we're going to change pace a little bit. We're going to pay tribute to a longtime coach and educator around our area. And I had the opportunity to coach with him 1 year, Mr. Fred Hill II. And today his guest is his son, Fred Hill III. Welcome. Glad you're here.
I appreciate you, Coach. Thanks for having me.
Now, I knew that your dad was born in Charleston area, and I knew at the time his parents were educators, but I just found out his dad was the daggone principal of Stonewall Jackson High School.
I don't know where you found that out, but that is true. And it's, his dad was actually, when he was growing up, he was a longtime Stonewall fan, even though he went to Charleston High, and he loved Charleston High, but his father was at Stonewall for many, many years. And, another irony to that is my brother's wife, her dad was also principal at Stonewall years later, decades later. So
Really?
yeah, it's kind of it's just one of those odd little things.
Well, I went to Morris Harvey. I like the Charleston area, and I did my student teaching at Woodrow Wilson Junior High down there, and it was a tough school, and of course Stonewall was just right down the road. But I didn't realize, and his dad also, Benjamin Frederick Hill the first, I guess he was. He ran a lot of these tournaments, tennis tournaments and baseball tournaments, and he was kind of big. I think he was a secretary or something of the teachers' retirement.
He was the head of the state teachers' retirement board, which is it's become something different now. It's like the state employees retirement board, but he was there. He was appointed by Governor Underwood back in the 50s. He was.
So how did your dad get the name Butch?
I don't honestly know. I've never asked him that. I really don't, but I can tell you exactly, who his friends are almost throughout life, because, those up to about 20, 21 years old, because he was young when he went to college, they still call him Butch. And then, as soon as he started teaching, they started calling him Fred. And, but, I've never asked that. And I wish, I kind of wish I would. Maybe I'll ask my mother that someday. But we also have a long-term tradition in our family. We name all of our dogs and cats after each other. So.
Oh, really?
My brother had dog Fred for a while, and we had myself, my family. We had a bulldog named Butch for a long time. So.
I had a friend that used to name his fish after his friends, and he had one named Wayne, and then he called me one day and said, "Man, Wayne died. He's floating." I don't know. I never had met Wayne, but your dad was. Who are a couple of his friends that you?
I tell you, several of his best friends. Well, probably his best friend growing up was Steve Baldwin, and I'm good friends with Steve's son Chuck to this day. But Steve and Dad, they ran around Charleston together, and they played football together at Charleston High. And, I think Dad got the, when Dad first went to Richwood, I believe Mr. Baldwin was the principal at Richwood. And, Mr. Baldwin went on to, he went over to Greenbrier County, and he was a superintendent over there for years and years and years. And,
I remember.
Yeah, he did. And he made some tough decisions over there, but I think he always remained, pretty well respected and, it was pretty highly thought of over there.
Now, I do something you probably don't know. I remember your dad telling me one time that he and a couple guys, age 14, they were in a circus type thing at Watpal Park in the annex area. And they were clowns, I think.
You got a heck of a memory, man. Because I tell you what, I believe, goodness, I think his name was, think it was Steve Sloman, and I met him years later, and I actually met him at a Charleston High event, and he told me that, and he was talking about that. Dad had told me that years before too, and Dad was embarrassed of it. Like he said, that was the most embarrassing thing he ever had happen in his life. He damn didn't like it, but I think that it, like I said, Mr. Sloman, he was telling me about that, and
Well, he
it
could
was
fall
just
back.
interesting.
That's something to fall back
Oh,
on.
it was funny, man. I mean, it was, it really was. It was funny, but I don't, like I said, I really don't know much about it other than my father said he was embarrassed, and not much embarrassed my dad.
Well, also, he'd mentioned one time when he was in about the ninth grade, I think, that he had gone to summer camp at Minnehaha Springs in Pocahontas County.
He went to Camp Minnehaha for years and years and years, and even then, it was a lot of out-state kids. And then I think he worked in college. I think in summers he worked up there as a counselor and worked the camp in different forms and fashions. But that camp's since been renamed. It's Camp Twin Creeks, and I sent my daughter there before. My middle child, I know she went, and she had a good time. Yeah, she enjoyed it. So it was, I was glad I was able to do that. And it's funny, my Aunt Mary, she's a little bit older than my dad, she found a Camp Minnehaha T-shirt years ago, and I had her put together quilts for my brother and sister, me and my father's T-shirts when he died. My mother, she gave me all of his T-shirts, and kind of did it as a surprise for my brother and sister for Christmas. And she threw one of those Camp Minnehaha shirts on there as a surprise for me. So it was great. I mean, it was. But
Now, he had one sister.
He had one sister, Mary.
Mary.
Yes, sir. And Mary, she went to Charleston High as well, and she met a gentleman, my Uncle Charlie. They're still together, and they actually live in Dad and Mary's old house that they grew up in, Fort Hill. So they're still there.
Now, where was Fort Hill?
Fort Hill is right beside South Hills. Some people tell you it's part of South Hills, but my dad always used to say it's a different hill altogether. He said it's a completely different hill altogether. Sometimes the Fort Hill people didn't want to be included with the South Hills people, and I sort of understand it after living in Charleston for years and years and years. But at the same time, I sort of don't. But it's when you're crossing over the Oakwood Bridge and you look straight up on the hill. It's all those houses right there on the mountain, and they moved a bunch of those houses too at one time. When they built the interstate, they pushed a lot of those houses up the hill, and Dad always said it was neat growing up in Charleston in that era because it was growing. Instead of shrinking, it was growing. And he said, the whole time he was growing, Fort Hill was being built. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of houses back there. So,
Now, your grandfather, he played tennis, didn't he?
He did, but now my father, I know Dad played tennis, and he was a tennis and a tackle in football in college, which, I was always kind of impressed by. But my grandfather, I never really met him. He died when my dad was young. He was out at Indiana, I believe, working on his doctorate, and he was out at the University of Indiana, and he died. I think Dad was 19, and Dad always, every time I would get in trouble for speeding or whatever, Dad would always tell me the only time he ever got a speeding ticket was flying, driving out to Indiana to go see his dad when he found out he died. So his yeah.
So your dad went to West Virginia Wesleyan and played football and played tennis in college.
Right,
and
did.
That's where he met your mom. Where was she from? What was her maiden name?
My mama she is from Silver Spring, Maryland, and she. Her parents, I know my grandfather, he actually, during the Depression, most people went west. He went east. He came from Richmond, Missouri, and, he traveled east to D.C. to, I think he went there. He was working in government, got his law degree, ended up being a hospital administrator, and in and around Silver Spring, and I know Charlottesville, Virginia. But, hey, my mother, she, she's top notch, and she went from Silver Spring. I think she played field hockey and stuff there. She was supposedly a pretty good field hockey player, and ended up at Wesleyan. She was a couple years younger than my dad, and and they met there at Wesleyan.
Actually, I guess your dad graduated from college in what, 67?
67, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, John Hutchison had written a thing one time about when your dad was, first year he was at Woodrow, and John, that's the year I graduated, and John played basketball, and your dad took him to Wesley and trying to recruit him to Wesley, and I think he ended up going to Davis and Elkins, but he said he thought your dad was more or less wanting to see your mom.
So he used as an excuse to see my mother. I wouldn't surprise me. But you know what? But hey, Dad, like I said, he probably was. He was probably trying to take care of the guy at the same time, the judge, and see my mother. So I don't doubt that for one second.
But no, I do remember something else your dad told me one time, that there was a short period of time he thought about being a minister at one time.
He mentioned that before to me, and there's a couple of things in life he's mentioned to me that life's funny. I mean, sometimes you really don't know what direction you're going to go. My dad, I will tell you this, and it wouldn't surprise me. It really wouldn't have.
Yeah.
And he taught Sunday school for nearly 40 years at the Methodist Temple, and I know his father taught Sunday school, and I guess that tradition ended with me. Maybe my brother's teaching some Sunday school, but let me tell you something. He was a heck of a Sunday school teacher, and one person that always talks about that's King Menor, younger King, and King sat in some of those Sunday school classes, and I mean, he knew the Bible. I mean, he really did. He was.
Well, I taught Bible one year in high school.
Really?
It was legal back then.
Yeah, I know.
The first time I went to Woodrow as a teacher, I had to teach 11th grade English, Bible, and reading seminar for seniors. Well, man, I wasn't much older than some of the seniors, and in the Bible it was supposed to have been taught as a literature and a history, and a lady that was there before had put the program in, Mrs. Wordsworth, and she retired, and man, I got these kids in from their dads were preachers and stuff, and I didn't know anything. I turned it over to them.
Judgmental, yeah.
I learned a lot.
I believe you.
But I only did it one year, and then I went to the administration. I said, I got 3 different preps, man. You're killing me.
I know. I get it.
So Neil Lacey and I were sponsors of the Bible Club, and it was a very active club there.
I know. I know. Kind of as an offshoot of that, I know that Dad has spoken before that he started teaching very young too. Because I mean, he was young, graduating high school and college, and he told me that a couple times. He said, man, that first year or two, he said, I really I had so much more in common with the students and the teachers. He said, it was kind of tough. He said, but he of course, he's professional and he managed it. But another one on that, I think Dad, he was really going to go to Ohio, and he was planning to take a coaching job in Ohio. I cannot remember where. I mean, that was years ago that he told me that, and I believe Coach Munson's dad picked him up. I can't remember. I think Coach Munson and him played football together up there in Westland. Yeah. And I can't remember if Dad, I think he was hitchhiking. Dad hitchhiked a lot when he was younger. And, he was talking to Coach Munson's dad. And, Coach Munson's dad was like, hey, let's see what we have here in Raleigh County. And, it's funny how just one little thing, one little car ride can change the whole, the whole
Well, see, at that
directive
time,
of your life.
At that time, it was really Woodrow Wilson. They had 100 teachers.
Right.
It was a big school, and it was hard to get in that school.
Mm-hmm.
But the year that I started, 18 teachers retired,
right.
And that's how I got a job. And it's kind of funny. Hubert Jackson was the principal then. In my interview. And I had worked at Sophie Elementary for a year and a half,
mm-hmm.
but in the interview with me, he said, he looked at me, he said, "Can you handle yourself around these high school girls?" And I said, "Yeah, I need a job." I was married. I said,
Yeah, I
"I
get
need a
it.
job."
No,
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. But I know Dad was there. He was there the first day the new school opened, and I believe it was the biggest school in the state then. And Dad always knew school numbers, and I think he said they had about 2,700 kids, in 10 through 12. I mean, it's amazing. You know what I mean? But when he was at Charleston High, I think they graduated 2 classes a year at Charleston High. They graduated a December class, and then they graduated a May class. So I mean,
Really?
he was used to much larger
Yeah.
schools.
Now he played for Coach Vincent, didn't he? Frank Vincent.
He did, and and but he always spoke highly of him, and Dad he loved Charleston High. He the man I don't there's several. He loved his children. He obviously loved his wife more than anything, and but he had a thing for Charleston High, and to the day he died, and he thought it was just a phenomenal school, and I think he always took that as as part of his as part of his perspective in the schools. I think a lot of the way he handled himself and handled the school and handled students. I think he learned some of that at Charleston High. I think that was he really thought highly of the place.
Now, when he was in college, he was, of course, he was active in a fraternity. Was it Kappa Alpha?
He was
Order?
KA.
Yeah, and I think he had some friends. Well, he got married in 1969, I guess. With
My mother graduated from college in '69. So yeah.
Yeah, and he had when he came to Woodrow, I guess he helped helped coach wrestling for a few years right there at the beginning. Then he took a break, and he was coaching football and stuff. And he was right down the hall from me. I think at D Wing at that time. And Gilbert Pennington had been the head wrestling coach when I was helping him. Ron Rose was assistant. I was just a volunteer assistant. And then Gilbert got a job with the board, and Ron decided to referee wrestling instead of coaching. And so the job was open. And so I was going to apply for it, but then somebody told me, said, "Well, Fred's going to apply for it, the head job." And I said, "Well, I thought, well, I'd like to help him." So I started up to his room. It was during a teacher's day that kids weren't there. Started up to his room, and about halfway up, he's coming down. And I said, "Man, I was just going up to your room to talk to you." And he said, "Well, I was coming down to your room to talk to you." And he said, "I'm going to tell you something right now." He said, "I'm going to apply for the wrestling job, but I don't want to be the head coach." He said, "I've been the head coach." He said, "I want to be assistant coach, and I'll assist you." And I said, "Well, I've never coached before, and I was going to be your assistant." And he said, "No, I don't want." He said, "I don't want the head paperwork and all that." He said, "I don't want to fool with that." But he said, and I said, "Well, if nobody else applies for it that knocked me out," I said, "We'll try it." And so it worked out great. And then Mike Tyree was doing his student teaching. He came out and helped. Randy Lilly had come back from Fairmont State and had wrestled at Woodrow. He had time on his hands, so he was a volunteer assistant. And to be honest with you, we didn't have a multitude of talent that year. We had a lot of kids that had never wrestled before, but really did a good job. And part of it was because we divided them up. Fred took the big guys, I took the guys. Randy, Mike took the smaller guys, and worked with them, and they were overachievers actually in a lot of ways. But it was great. It was a good experience. And but then I went to the Y. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse, even though I really liked teaching and stuff. It was just one of those economics, and then Mike took over the next year. But that's how I got to know your dad really well, and I always had a lot of respect for him. One time he was selling his protein drinks, man, And he's telling me, you drink this and then you lose weight. And well, I didn't have to lose too much weight at that time, but he was making it. You take this
Giving
pill
you
and
his
then
pitch, yeah.
and that was. He said, yeah, just mix it. You can mix it with water, mix it with milk, or
Oh, some of that stuff was terrible.
It was a mess.
I know exactly what you're. It's like wheat germ or whatever. It was some of that stuff. I mean, I was drinking. He had me drinking some of that stuff too, and I mean, it was awful. I know. I knew where you were going with that.
It was nasty.
And I've never heard one other person mention that, but I knew where you were going with that. I can still see those bottles sitting in the house. We had them for years.
Oh, I had them. I never did. It was kind of like a pyramid thing. I was supposed to recruit people to, and shoot, I wasn't about to talk to nobody.
Oh, I know.
I think I ended up throwing away most of it, but I tried. But it would make your mouth so dry, and I mean, it would, and plus it was, you could taste it.
It was terrible
all day long. It was, but he got one sale, I know for sure. But like you mentioned, he taught Sunday school for almost 40 years. He was really active in Bible study. He was a lot of people didn't realize he was an avid reader. Man, he read all kinds of different, and letter writer, and
he absolutely was, and he passed a lot of that on to his kids, especially me. I would, when I was growing up, I mean, I was a freakish reader. I mean, I really was, and I still read a lot to this day. But if you remember correctly, I would come to you and always tell you what you wrote in your column. I mean, you gave me a couple of squeezes of the water bottles, but I mean, I really would. I'd read the paper front to back. I mean, I just was that kind of kid, and
I was the same way. I delivered papers. I delivered the morning Beckley paper and the morning Charleston paper. And I read both of them before I went to school every day. And still read. I read one or two books a week most of the time, and don't never know what I want to read. But he was. I didn't realize. I think I read in his obituary that he was an avid stock. He followed stocks.
He was.
He didn't make any money at it.
Dad did okay. I will. I mean, he's. My dad was understated, and a lot of times, he was. A lot of times he was the smartest guy in the room. People didn't realize it, and he wasn't going to tell them. But Dad did okay. You know what I mean? And listen, my mother lives very comfortably, and and I know in large part because my dad was very frugal when I was growing up, and trust me, I know he was very frugal. But also, Dad was he was investing. He was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. He used to make me invest my own money, when I was cutting grass. Like, I mean, I had a UTMA account, one of those Uniform Transfer Minor Act accounts, and he at the time I thought he was halfway nuts. Not nuts. I just wasn't real happy with him. But I mean, years later, I mean, I was grateful as can be. I remember when I bought my first 100 shares of First Energy. I was 12 years old. I mean, I was cutting grass around Crescent Road, and he told me, he said, "You're going to put half that money away," and I did. I had an account in Wheat First. I mean, it was under his name and mine, but yeah.
Now, did you you tell us about your brother and sister when you guys? I mean, Andy played football for me, and it was kind of funny. I always tried to, when I was a head coach, my center always wanted a smart guy. I wanted somebody smart, and I didn't really care. Junior high, the play starts with the snap.
Oh, I agree.
So first of all, you gotta have a smart guy doesn't get out there and do crazy things, and it's nice if they're bigger and they block.
I agree. I understand. I do.
But Andy was a fantastic center for me. Great kid, good team member and stuff. And I didn't know your sister that well, but
I'll tell you what, my brother is probably the most like my dad of the three of us, and Jenny and Andy, they're just great humans. I mean, they're phenomenal humans compared to me. But my buddy Skinny, Mark Blankenship, he's been one of my best buddies since I was 12 years old. But he always calls Andy Little Daddy because they used to call Dad Big Daddy at Woodrow, and he calls Andy Little Daddy. He says a lot of his mannerisms and and just his speech patterns and so forth remind him of Dad. I get that some too, but it's just funny. As far as my sister, Jenny was always the smart one, the most well behaved. Jenny did a lot of things right. She's continued to, into life. Jenny's very, very successful. She and her husband, they both work at Virginia Tech, and she's one of the lead fundraisers up there. And
Does your mom was a counselor, wasn't she?
my mother was a social worker,
Social
and
worker.
she took off a number of years when we were young, and she stayed at the house, until I think I was about in sixth grade. We lived over there by Crescent, and at that time everybody walked to school. You know what I mean? And my mom was funny. She walked us to school one day. My sister always used to laugh about this. She'd walk us the first day of kindergarten, and then we walked on our own. But and if I missed the bus, going to park, she gave me a ride one time. And after that, I was walking down Harper Road. Usually Cedric Robertson would come by or somebody. It usually was Cedric because he was heading to work about the same time. He'd pick me up and take me. But Andy's doing well. He's got a few more years till he can retire, and he's a full-time air guardsman. And Andy is just he's a phenomenal family guy. Dad. He's a lot like my dad. He really is. And and Jenny. Andy has 3 kids that he's raising there in Charleston. They go to GW and John Adams, and Jenny has 1 son, and he goes to Blacksburg Middle, I believe.
Now, I saw a picture on Facebook, and Jenny's in her dance costume, and you're standing beside her making some kind of a face, and Andy's looking at her like, and she's like, it was fun.
That was those dance recitals at Park. They used to be about 1,000 degrees, and it felt like, when you're a little kid and you're sitting there watching that, it felt like those things lasted 10 hours in that auditorium.
Those hard seats.
Oh, I know, man. It was, and it was hot and it was long, but hey, Jenny was a dancer and she was a heck of a cheerleader, and those were fun times. Those were good times.
Now, your dad, he left Woodrow and went to Richwood.
He did. I think
he was somewhere in between. He was at Horace Mann, wasn't he? He went
from Woodrow to Richwood 73, 74, and he wasn't there very long. Now he's telling me, it was like, he said, Freddie, he said, he probably treated me as well in Richwood as they treated me anywhere. He went there, and I think he was pretty well liked, and he won some games there at Richwood High. And he always looked back fondly on his time at Richwood. He did everywhere, but he said he got treated very well there at Richwood. And there's a funny story to this, but like I say, he wasn't there very long, and he went to Charleston. That's the first place I really remember living. He was at Horace Mann for a couple of years, and then he came back to Woodrow. And from what I understand, and you would understand this better than me, and especially in today's environment, it's kind of, I think when he came back here that second time, he kind of, I don't know that he would have, not gone back to Charleston or whatnot, but the seniority issues really started popping up, as far as the counties and layoffs and so forth. And, so he was there at Horace Mann for a couple of years. We lived over on South Park in Kanawha City. I can remember walking over to Charlie games with him and Mom. And my sister was born in that time frame. She was born in Charleston. And then, like I said, or like you said, he came back to Woodrow for several years. He was big buddies with Coach Hicks. They were really good friends. Again, Coach Cool and many others there. But he came back here for several years to Woodrow before he moved over to Shady.
Now, how long was he at Shady?
He was at Shady from 78 to, I believe, 88. He came out to Woodrow when I was in 10th grade, second semester, and he, it was funny because I honestly really kind of always enjoyed having him around. You know, I mean, a lot of people they say, "Hey, your dad's," but you know, I mean, Dad was he was pretty well respected, and kids liked him, and you know, and it was. Now if I wasn't doing something right, I heard about it. You know, I mean, he was on me, but you know, for the most part, I really enjoyed having him over there at Woodrow, and I think you know, I mean, I know a lot of my friends really did too.
Oh, who was the disciplinarian in the family, your mom or your dad? And how did they discipline you?
They both were. They both were, and I think mom and dad learned a lot with me, and I think my sister and brother learned even more watching me. So you know, there was. I think everything worked out better for my sister and brother because they figured it out watching it all.
Did
So,
they spank you?
oh yeah, I mean, yeah, it was. It was. You know, he up until about sixth grade, yeah, he did, and you know, and a lot of that stuff it wouldn't fly now, but you know, I'm thankful for it because Lord knows I needed it at times, and you know, I was just one of those kids. I always needed to be in the middle of everything, and I need to be in the middle of the action, and
Oh
sometimes the
yeah.
action wasn't good. You know what I mean? So
Well, my two boys, they received a few spankings. The youngest one, he got more than my oldest son, John, did,
yeah,
but it was just trivial. It wasn't nothing really serious, but I'd get a phone call at school, and I'd
I
come home, and as soon as I come in the door, John would say, "Dad's home. Grab your ankles, man."
well, one time I had this, I had gone to this Virginia Tech all sports camp, and I had this Virginia Tech. It was called a VT paddle, and you got the paddle if you behaved the first week, and then you get brands. You know, they would brand the paddle at these campfires if you know behave the next week and next week. It was like, and then you know, I only went 1 year. It was a pretty expensive camp for at least you know for my family, and he couldn't find his KA paddle, the hardwood paddle, which I've since given to Mark Blankenship because they were KA brothers together, and he couldn't find that paddle. So he found my VT paddle, and that VT paddle wasn't hardwood like the K was. He broke that VT. my my mother, she was, you know, it was just it's funny now looking back at it. But like I said, every time I got paddled, I certainly deserved it.
Well, your dad had some had some good teams at Shady
He
Springs,
did.
and I was trying to think. I know Paul Wheeler helped him
He did.
first and then Paul went and moved, and then Matt Bell
Matt Bell, he did.
was helping
Those are
out.
good guys, man. Those are great
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
John McCumbus was there too, and Coach York helped him a little bit. And he had Statman there, Dave May. Dave May was he.
Did the Paint Boys play for him?
I don't think so.
Okay, I thought they might have came a little later. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
I don't think they did.
okay.
But he really did. Those first couple of years, I know. I was talking with somebody the other day that I can't remember if it was Jeff Bowman or who it was, but you know they were 8-2, and that's maybe it was the first or second year, and they lost 2 games by 1 point each. You know, what I mean, it kept them out of the playoffs. I think they were only taking 4 teams then. You know, I mean, they practiced
Yeah.
for an extra week and they didn't get in. But one of them, you know, one of my favorite stories about Dad is they were playing in Nicholas County, and they were up about, you know, I mean, they were up, I think 14. I can't remember. It was like 14-0 or whatever, and the transformer blew at Nicholas County's field. This is about 79, and Dad said, "Hey," he said, "let's take this game to Shady High." He said, "Well, you know," so we got lights at Shady. He said, "We got lights at Shady," and they were like, "We're not," you know what I mean? He said, Nicholas County was like, "We'll just come back. You come back and play it tomorrow." And Dad was like, "We can go play it tonight." I mean, he was adamant. He wanted to keep playing this game. Came back the
Yeah.
next day. Came back the next day. Ended up losing. I think it was like 28-14. Dad, I don't think he ever got over that one.
Yeah, that would be. Now he also, I can remember, he was still playing competitive tennis when he was over 45. I mean,
He was.
he was still playing in some of these. Tennis used to be big. They used to have a lot of open tournaments in Beckley and stuff. And
Dad and Mom, they would play in some of those mixed doubles tournaments and stuff. And Dad taught me to play tennis. And, you know, I never set the world on fire, but, you know, I mean, I was decent. So, but that's who I learned from, was Dad.
Now he became assistant principal. I guess that's why he left Shady.
No, he was assistant principal and the head football coach at Shady.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, he absolutely was, and it was it was never an issue back in those days. I guess it became a little bit more of an issue later on for him and some other people. But yeah,
Well, it actually was still not a rule. It was never a rule, but there was a few superintendents that thought, well, if you're an administrator, you can't be a coach, and I got into that situation myself, and I didn't really like it, but it's never actually been a rule in this county. But now so why did he come back to Woodrow? He just wanted closer to home and like Woodrow?
Well, at one point in my young life when I wasn't behaving, I think he was borderline. It was probably about the last time I seriously cried. He was going to make me go out to Shady Junior High. I think, I was in 7th grade. I wasn't behaving. I had you in class that year in 7th grade. And I talked him out of it. So, but I think the biggest thing was, he wanted us to go to Woodrow. He wanted us to, for, opportunities and athletics and so forth. And we lived in Beckley, and, I think he fully expected us just to go where we lived. And, I think he liked the idea of being out at Woodrow when, all his 3 kids went out there. And, and he did. He enjoyed it. I think he enjoyed being around us, being around our friends, being around the student body out there. He was, how Dad was.
Now, he's one of those guys that I've never heard anybody say anything bad about him.
It's amazing, really.
I really haven't. And the last time that I know he retired in around 2001, something like that, and then he became a masseuse for a while.
He was a massage therapist for a while.
And I saw him the last time I actually talked to him a little bit. I was running the chains. I was retired at Park, and I was running the chains for Park. And he was up there, and I think Dale was the coach over at Beckley Stratton, and Street was coaching a little bit with him, and Coach Ray, and your dad was up there with him, and he was having some health issues then, and he's having a lot of problems walking, and but he come over, we talked a little bit, and at halftime, the team went down to the dressing room, and by the time he got down there, they was almost ready to come back up. But he was a trooper, and he was hanging there. What kind of health issues did he have? I mean, he died young.
Yeah, he died 74, and honestly, we did sometimes, my brother and I would talk, and sometimes you didn't know if he'd be alive another 5 minutes or 5 years. I mean, we were grateful for all the years that we did have him, but he had some heart issues, and he was diabetic, and he had the what is it, the COP or the lung issues. So I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think he was stubborn, and he stuck it out as long as he could to be around his grandkids. I really do. I really believe that. I think he fought and fought and fought. He looked at me one time. He said, "If I have another heart attack," he said, "I'm not going to the hospital." I said, "Well, Dad," I said, I said, that's on you. He said, but he was, man. He was, Dad could be stubborn, and in a good way usually. But I really do think that, he enjoyed seeing his grandkids grow up, and that kept him around for a good long time.
Yeah. Now your mother recently has started a fund with the Beckley Area Foundation, and I'm huge. I love the Beckley Area Foundation. They've been good to me over the years when I've had fundraisers and tried to, like Van Meter Project and, working on the field up there. They've always gave me money. Anytime I ask for something, they've always, and so your mother has started it's a scholarship.
It is. She started a scholarship, and it's I believe it's the Joy and Fred Hill, scholarship fund. It's for Woodrow students, at least initially. I'm not going to speak for her on anything coming, forward, but and I believe it helps to fund, Woodrow students going to college or going to tech school, because Dad was a big believer in, tech and VOTech, and I kind of like how she set the GPA on it. It wasn't for how grades are inflated now. Kids have 4.9s. You know what I mean? But I think she set that GPA, somewhere right around they had to have like a 2.8 or 3.0. Don't quote me on that, but somewhere around where her son's grades were. So, but it's, she and Dad was a big believer in just, in regular hardworking people. And, I think this is kind of an offshoot of it. So, I'm proud of Mom for doing that. I think that's a great thing. I really, really do. And I'm not super familiar with the Beckley Area Foundation because I was gone for so many years. I remember the Y and the United Way signs at the Y and the painting the thermometer and all that. But I know that was something my mother really wanted to do, and not even so much to honor Dad or whatnot, or but just a legacy to possibly help some hardworking kids get to school.
Well, that's that adds to the legacy that your mom and dad have, and it's quite a testimony for your family, and I think it's a great idea, and it's the Joy and Fred Hill Scholarship Fund.
I believe that is the name of
Okay.
it. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And it's, this one is for Woodrow students. I know that. And, she's, again, my mother is a very giving lady, and, and I'm very proud of her. And I know my brother and sister are as well. We couldn't, we couldn't be prouder of our mother.
Well, Fred, I'm glad you came by to talk to me today, and I really enjoyed reminiscing about your dad, and I don't think he'll ever be forgotten. Like I said, I've always remembered, and most people, I've never heard anybody say anything bad about him, and that's quite a legacy in itself. Not many people can say that, and I sure appreciate you stopping by.
Well, hey, thank you, Coach. I appreciate it, man.
Anybody else out there that'd like to be on our podcast can hit me up at awbennett50@gmail.com, and we'll get you on there, and God bless you.